I'll have folks from the steering group introduce themselves just for roll call. I'm Megan Roy. I'm the chair of the commission. And just letting folks know Peter Conlon's not able to make it today. So, Anne, you're the first person on my screen.
Ann Cummings, I'm from the Vermont Senate.
Jennifer?
Good morning, Jennifer Deck Samuelson, Vermont State Board of Education.
Thanks. Zoe?
Hi, good morning. Zoe Saunders, Interim Secretary of Education.
Nicole?
Hi, Nicole Mace, representing the Vermont School Boards Association.
And Craig?
Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner.
Thank you. Just a quick logistics. Thank you to those on the call for keeping your cameras off just while you're not speaking. It helps us to be able to see steering group members. Steering group, any adjustments to the agenda? Okay. Great, then I will take a motion to approve the draft minutes from our August 5th meeting.
I'll move.
Thanks, Jennifer. Second? Nicole, thanks. Any discussion or things that need to be adjusted? All right. Hearing none, all those in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Looks like it's all ayes. Thank you. Great. So we're going to have, if there are comments from the public, we'll have some time at the beginning and the end. And just a reminder, there's an opportunity for public to give input to the steering group. If we have many people, then we may need to institute timelines. I don't think we have that many people on the call today. And you may not receive an immediate response to your comment. We may not respond. We may take the input into consideration for future meetings. We may follow up directly. So before we get started, is there anyone from the public who would like to speak? You can raise your hand or turn your camera on. I don't see anyone. A reminder, folks on the phone, I think actually, Suzanne, you can tell me it's star something to unmute.
Yes, it's *5 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to move us forward. Looks like no one's needs to comment right now, and we'll have another opportunity at the end of the meeting. So steering group, this is your opportunity. We had talked at our last meeting about a couple of things as a general agenda item, which is agenda planning and helping to frame our full commission meetings. And then specifically, we have a couple of things for us to discuss. So, and they're related to agenda planning, but we thought it would be instructive to bring a draft of a definition of terms and guiding principles, because that is one of the things the full commission will talk about on Monday. And then updates to the work plan that was presented to the full commission. Before we jump into those discussions, I didn't know if anyone from the finance subcommittee wanted to give just a quick update or anything from that discussion that may be something we need to put on the agenda.
So Nicole, so we met, we elected Emily Kornheiser as chair. We talked about a lot about data and what data we had and how we would deal with it and how we would interpret it. I can't think of anything we needed, but I'm looking at other members. We also discussed, because it had been a topic of discussion at the full committee or commission, the use of a consultant, but at this point we felt we really needed to look at the data that we had available, and before we decided if we needed a consultant, and if we did, if we needed one to help us collect and or interpret data. So and we tried to set the next meeting and failed, so we're into the doodle poll model.
Great. Thank you, Anne. Nicole?
I would just add, I think there was some sense of both urgency in terms of the short-term proposals that are due in December and wanting to actually have those be publicly sort of available, especially as districts are preparing their budgets, but balancing that against the overwhelming complexity of this issue and the data, not wanting to drown in data, but also ensuring we have a clear, I think Emily Kornheiser started the meeting with a conversation around what's the problem we're trying to solve. And so I think we agreed to a more aggressive schedule of meetings than perhaps other committees because we have this looming deadline. But yeah, that's doodle poll will help us determine whether that can be accomplished.
Great. Yes, Zoe.
I'll just share from the agency perspective, we committed to bringing forward the additional data that we have on file and have already started planning to review those requests against what is currently available.
Great. There will be committee updates on Monday's agenda because we agreed that would be a regular part. So I'm sure you'll give a similar update to the full commission. Is there a need for agenda time other than your committee's update? I'm sensing not based on this summary, but okay.
I don't think so.
Great. Well, so I think we'll move on to kind of the first part. Well, these are not necessarily in order, actually, but the two conversations I think we wanted to have is we are bringing to the commission an updated work plan, and also the commission loosely agreed that we needed to start this conversation about kind of definition of terms and guiding principles. They kind of talked about both of those. And there was a desire to start with the question of educational equity and what do we mean by that when we talk about that. That to me, that's connected to this issue of guiding principles, which is really about how will we make our decisions? What are the principles upon which we'll run our decisions through? And I think folks agreed that it's easier to start that conversation with a draft. So part of today's conversation is what kind of draft might we be bringing them? And so I think it would be helpful for folks just to have a little bit of an open conversation. And to start that, I also, Zoe's presentation grounded us last time in the various places in Vermont law that equity is defined. And so that was already shared. And I don't know if there's a desire to start there, or does someone want to offer up a discussion that kind of can get us to, here's what we're thinking, commission. Yes, Nicole.
I think we have statutorily defined what equal education. So there's equity and there's equal educational opportunity. And I think equity is far more nuanced and complex. And I'm not sure that this commission needs to define that term. I'm not sure how long that would take, because I know there are school boards that across the state that spent months having these conversations with their communities about how to define equity and what that means in terms of policy. So I think for the purposes of grounding this work and the timelines of this work, that we start with what's in statute, which is a mirror of the holding of the Brigham case, which to me means it's also in our Constitution, which is sort of non-negotiable. We don't necessarily need to debate it. And so it's substantially equal access to a quality basic education, educational opportunities that are substantially equal, even though programs may vary district to district. So it doesn't mean the same exact programming, but it means substantially equal access to a quality basic education. I just fear conversations around equity could take us down.
Long path.
And I don't know how core that is. I think we can talk about equal educational opportunity and have that be meaningful for the work.
Yeah, interested to hear from others. I would just echo the there are as many definitions of equity, and it is a very complicated construct to define for the purposes of our work. Yeah, Zoe.
I do think there's value in having the conversation around equity and establishing some core understanding of what that term means, and being able to bring that forward with a couple basic assumptions. That equity does not mean everyone gets the same thing or equal services, but that it is differentiated by the needs of the student and the community. So I think that basic principle is important to bring forward. I also think it's important, as we talk about equity, to think about it in terms of two areas: equity in terms of input, which is more around access to opportunity, versus equity in outcomes, which would assume that if we have the right inputs in place, students, regardless of their zip code or other factors, are able to have the same outcomes in terms of being able to read by third grade and some of those key milestones. So I do think there's some value in having some basic conversations and forming agreement on some core principles around equity. I do agree with Nicole's point that this work is very complex, and it will require a lot of iterations to get it right. A lot of what we've built into the district quality standards and education quality standards is really helping us to get there. Many of those standards are outlining more of the inputs to the system and those conditions that we believe, if put in place, will achieve equitable outcomes. And so part of the work as we're rolling those out is to begin to refine in those and really be able to quantify those kind of high priority standards. I think that process can be parallel as long as we upfront clearly define these assumptions around what equity means.
Being able to touch on those key concepts, Zoe, will match what a lot of what we hear from the public around equity is making sure that there's some non-negotiables. There's probably a more artful term than that, but that's, I do think that's the spirit of what people are looking for. I also wonder, Zoe, just bringing up education quality standards, the other thing that I think people are looking for is kind of the concept of an operational definition of what we mean by quality. And that's in Vermont, that is the education quality standards. That is how we define it. And I think it may be actually helpful to reference that in this set of guiding principles is when we say, because even equal opportunity, right, substantially equal educational opportunity, that is still not operationally defined, except it is in Vermont. And I think actually we forget that even as school boards and others are having those conversations. Nicole and then Zoe.
Thank you. I just had two things. One, Zoe, I liked those principles that you articulated because I think they're pretty straightforward and accurate. I don't think that there's a lot of debate and would be helpful to add that level of additional clarity beyond what's in statute. So I appreciate that. And the second piece around educational quality standards, 100% agree. It's not a mystery how we define quality education. I think what is a mystery is how districts are held accountable to those standards. And that's why most people feel like, I mean, yeah, sure, we've got them written down, but do we ever really monitor? Do we ever really, does the public know how their school is faring on those? And so I think I'm hopeful that part of the listen and learn work that the agency's doing is start to put a lot of these pieces together, because that is not work the commission needs to do. It's work that's has been done over many years. It's just not necessarily been implemented consistently.
Yeah, Zoe.
Nicole, good points. And I agree with that. I think we do have an operational definition of education quality, and the work we're doing as an agency is to really ensure higher accountability to those standards. Part of that process has been prioritizing a core set of the education quality standards as part of the district quality standards, and thinking about how we are phasing in our prioritization of those standards. Part of the listen and learn is to really help to evaluate the extent to which those standards have been implemented, and design a system where we can have better visibility so that we can support the fidelity of implementation. And where there are barriers to implementing those education quality standards, that the agency can then differentiate our support to help schools, SUs, and districts achieve those standards. So it might be helpful at the next commission meeting maybe to bring forward a little clarity around how we are operationalizing those standards from EQS to ground that conversation. And I'd be happy to do that with our team.
Thanks, Zoe. Other thoughts?
Are there other terms that have come up that from your perspective, Megan, we should be talking about?
Well, for me, it's this idea of guiding principles. And I think, and I've also heard people use the term criteria when they refer to that. And my sense is what people mean, and this is both people on the commission, but also members of the public, is when you are vetting ideas, right? At the end of the day, this commission's presenting recommendations. When you are vetting your recommendations, what's the set of guiding principles or criteria? And I guess an observation I'm having, that this is really, I'm posing this back to you all, but your set of guiding principles may be, the commission's set of guiding principles may be that our recommendations promote equity, allow students to have this conceptual understanding of equity that we've just talked about, or that we're forming. It's aligned with how we define educational opportunity in the law, and it allows ed quality as it's defined in Vermont law. And I'm part of me is wondering if that is the set of guiding principles, right? So
I think,
yeah.
I think when we were defining the problem, the other half of that is financially sustainable. And that's where the tension is. So it would need to be financially sustainable. How you define that, I'm not sure.
Thanks, Ann. Yeah, I have a thought coming back to that, Zoe,
Okay.
and then Nicole.
I was going to offer maybe a simplified approach to this, and thinking about it as really a three-legged stool, right? And thinking about those three areas being affordability, equity, and educational best practices. I think affordability is something that is going to be challenging for us to define, and I'm not sure we've clearly unpacked that. I like the framing around sustainability versus affordability because I think that is more future focused. So I might revise my categories to be sustainability, equity, and educational best practices, and making sure that those decisions all fall in line with those objectives.
Nicole?
I think this is a really important conversation for the full commission to have, because I think it will also help inform the Ed Finance Committee. Because there are so many layers to this question of affordability or sustainability. And I think part of the question is, what is it that we want our education system to deliver? We've defined that in the education quality standards, but my sense is particularly post-pandemic, schools are going beyond that mission in order to step in to meet unmet needs provided by other sectors, public sectors. And so it may be a real bargain that we're spending what we're spending and getting the level of mental health services or what have you. We don't know that yet, but I think that's a piece of it. Another piece of it is the extent to which we rely on the property tax to fund education. We are out of the norm compared to the rest of the country. And so is it really a matter of rebalancing the funding sources? I think that needs to be part of the conversation. So I would really appreciate space for different commission members to grapple with what do we mean when we say, and what are the different layers to that question? Because I think that'll be helpful for us all, but also for the Ed Finance Committee, because we spent a fair amount of time yesterday talking about what's the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate too, our job today is just to give us something to start with for the commission. This is absolutely, I agree, a full commission conversation. What's striking to me is those three elements, which I think are the elements, a facet of sustainability even and affordability, frankly, is toward what end and what are our outcomes? Because one of the pieces of the problem statement is uncertainty as to whether or not we're getting the outcomes we want out of our current system. And sustainability, if everyone fully agreed that we're getting what we want out of our education system and therefore that's the cost, I mean, I can't predict that everyone would be okay with that, but that would be a different conversation than where we are now, which is not having clarity around that. So I feel like if we provide, actually, Jennifer, you go first. I was going to summarize, so you go.
And I've been having internet issues this morning, so I apologize for that. No, I'm thinking about really the tension here is, just being on the State Board of Ed, there are certain very, very small communities that, really want their very, very small school. And it's this tension between, state and local control, which I think also comes into play. And, to Nicole's point, equity is going to mean different things to different people. So how do we construct, some tent that's big enough and area enough for everyone to fit into it? Because, and what outcomes are we talking about? Because again, I think that might mean different things to different people. So I don't have an answer. I'm just kind of naming that. And at the same time, I'm going to recognize the, number of school budgets that failed this year. So, I think we can all agree there's a problem, but I think even within various communities, there might not be consensus on what that problem is. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, and I think, and I'm, this came up even just listening in on the Finance Committee conversation, but the tension between, it's part of why the charge of the commission touches on everything from governance to decision making and who holds it to ed quality, because there is tension between, cost containment without parameters in other areas allows a community to make a decision to preserve something at the expense of something else. And there's, if we, there needs to be a, if you're preserving a delivery model in a very small setting, it is going to come at the expense perhaps of programmatic offerings at your high school or something like that. And it's why the charge is as complex as it is. The tension is the need to see property tax relief in the short term while we figure out those really complicated things, because we aren't going to be able to turn around effective recommendations on all of it by December. And yet we need to give the General Assembly something to be able to take action with this semester. I'm just restating the obvious, but I think the more we remind folks that that is why this is so complex, I think that's really important. So the summary that I was going to suggest is that if we start the full commission conversation about this with kind of a restatement of the pieces that Zoe had pulled out in the slides about the statutory definitions in Vermont, conceptual understanding of equity concepts at a really high level. It does not mean equal. Equity does not mean equal. It means targeting resources and connecting them with need. So we kind of have that. And then we reference the education quality standards. And I think if we start there as the definition / guiding principles, and Zoe, if there is an opportunity to, flesh out some of the ed quality measures, I think that's great. The definition we use, we'll just reference them, but for context, I think that'll be helpful. I like the framing of the three components, the sustainability / affordability, equity, and I would say education quality or ed best practices. So if we create a framework like that, is that enough to start the conversation with the steering group? With the full commission. Nicole.
So I was going to add something else, not to answer your question.
Oh, okay.
But I do wonder whether we've had several public comments around, sort of alluding to sort of constitutional rights to local decision making, or which I've never quite understood exactly what those asserted rights are. So I do think some principle be clarified that ultimately it's the state's responsibility to provide education. It has chosen to delegate that responsibility to districts, but that is a choice, and it's not a sort of right, because that might be important further down the road.
That's really helpful as an additional component. Okay.
So Nicole, to that point, are you suggesting we had another category around responsibility or accountability?
Authority, authority and accountability. I don't know that I don't want to mess with the stool because I like that image, but I do think as part of
We've got 4 legs.
Yeah, that's true. Be really problematic. So, I think it is that sort of roles, responsibilities piece of this that's important for the commission to talk about and acknowledge.
I actually wonder if that's over the stool, not to belabor the metaphor, but that it is the responsibility of the state, period. So the accountability, the responsibility, the authority does lie there. And so anyway, I don't know
for
that
all
I think
three
that
legs of the stool, right? Like, yes. I think that's right, right? Like that's the overarching environment
That's
that the stool is sitting in. That's right. Yeah.
I'm drawing our stool right now.
Okay. It does, I mean, it feels to me, again, with the goal just simply being it's easier to start with something. It feels like, and I am happy to draft something that could go, it's Thursday now, and we do want to try to give them something to react to by tomorrow. I'm happy to take a stab at that. It will have draft all over it so that if we don't quite capture this perfectly, that's what we'll talk about on Monday. But I
And
think that, yeah, Nicole.
I would just love for Zoe to share with you the print equity principles she articulated.
Absolutely.
I don't know how good your note taking is, but I thought those were pretty good.
Yes. Well, what I was going to say before I realized it was Thursday, and I can still do this, is typically what I would do is send my draft to you all so you could email back to me to see if I caught it. It would give us one more opportunity for edits to happen. There's just not a lot of daylight between now and when Suzanne and Maureen will want to get the materials out. So that's all. So if I don't capture it, I think I took good notes, but I'm open for anyone's edits, whether they come before they go in the materials packet or whether they come on Monday. I'd be happy to hear them.
I'll send some notes to you also. Maybe,
Perfect.
So we can coordinate.
Sounds good. Okay. So I think, so the next piece of this related to kind of agenda planning is we presented the kind of cover page and work plan framework, right? That was one of the things that actually came up at the meeting, is to call it a framework, which I think is appropriate. I'm trying to think of the easiest way to do that. What we want to do is bring them potentially a revised draft. And I guess the question I would pose to the steering group, a lot of the conversation in particular, or one of the pieces that jumped out for me, is kind of concern about what felt like two really big bodies of work, which is the governance section and the delivery model. And it was unclear to commission members that just felt really important enough for those to be full commission conversations instead of delegated to subgroups. And also the worry that we would take too long to kick that work off. And that's partially, I guess, a question I would start with is, I think that that's something that this steering group also acknowledged. And I wonder if there's just a better way to represent it than we have in the current framework, because I think that's exactly what the steering group intended, is that these are, many of the conversations for this will happen as a full commission. There was just a need to kick off the other two first. Zoe, and then Craig.
I think the discussion we just had around the guiding principles helps to clarify this approach. So as we think about the overall responsibility, naturally we'll have conversations around structure. And so I think being explicit and intentional of weaving that through the entire conversation would be important. And then at such time that we have clarity around what specific recommendations may need to be put forward, we may decide to move that as an offshoot of a committee. And I think we just need to be clear upon when we would make that decision.
Yeah, thanks. Craig.
And well, I had a light bulb moment after the last full commission meeting where I hadn't looked closely enough in the meeting at the document. But we had acknowledged, I think, as a steering group as well, that the education delivery system should be full commission work, because it even says that on the breakout that we have. So I think we got a little stuck in the full commission because I think folks were like, wait, I don't love that as a subcommittee. But I think we sort of got a little stuck there because we didn't mean for that either as a steering committee, I don't think. We had talked about a subcommittee for the governance, and then also here the concern, Megan, about the timing, which we have flagged on both of those as early 2025. And maybe there's an opportunity to improve that, but That was one thing I walked away from the last meeting and went, oh, like, no, I think we were all saying the same thing, at least on the education delivery system. We just didn't know it.
Yeah, and actually, even as I'm looking at the document that we all looked at together, I don't even think I scrolled down to that part of it in the full meeting to remind folks that. Although it does make me think, this language of full commission work leveraged and coordinated by the steering group, is that also true of governance? Because governance still says subcommittee. So I guess that would be a potential kind of change we can make. And I agree. I think it's actually pretty easy for us to just frame that instead of saying initiates early 2025, we can just let that say ongoing. Because it is, Nicole.
I think when we added the conversation around balance, so it started out as sort of role of the state board, role of the agency. But then we, I think, appropriately added local control versus state control. And I think that elevates it to full commission work. And I think it really dovetails with the education delivery system conversation. So I would support moving that away from a subcommittee to full commission work. I think our role as steering group is how do we sequence the conversations in ways that make sense and keep the conversation sort of moving forward. I agree with talking, getting rid of, I think that was another sticking point. Why are we waiting until 2025 to have these conversations? And I think, the presentation that Zoe shared last commission, we do need to continue the table setting and the sort of mutual shared understanding. And that may be work that starts this fall. We're not launching into recommendations, right away. So maybe that's a clarifying, is that we really want to use the fall to build collective understanding, get the questions on the table, put ideas on the table before we start to really zero in on different avenues.
Yeah, that's a really helpful clarifier so that folks can see the work progressing. Jennifer, and then I think Anne.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I agree, and I'm just looking at the chart that we had at our last commission meeting. So under governance, resources, and administration and delivery systems, I think to your point, Megan, we can just have that note ongoing. And then, and I think similarly, we should delete subcommittee under governance, resources, and administration and have it be full commission work. And, again, note that the steering group is going to set the agenda. I think, one of the things that I'm remembering from the commission meeting is that there was some discussion about whether we needed to have more interim deadlines. And my understanding is we don't really. I think, we internally need to keep this moving forward. But I don't think we necessarily needed to have deadlines baked into the table as far as the work plan goes. And then my final comment is to Nicole's point, it probably would be helpful to sort of plot out that, in the fall, we're going to be doing this, again, sort of building this foundation of, defining key terms, the triangle of equity, sustainability, and ed quality. What does that mean? And that we're really going to be setting the table for the work that's going to come. And I think there probably needs to be something in here to note that.
Yeah. Anne and then Zoe.
Yeah. Again, we aren't the only ones having this conversation. The delivery system is going to come up in the legislature. It came up last year, didn't get resolved. But no matter what our timeline is, we're going to need to be able to say something to the legislature, like maybe you shouldn't do anything that yet this year, but this is what we're thinking, because that's the delivery system is where things get controversial. It gets into local control and state control. And that conversation's going to happen, no matter what we do. So it, again, how are we going to interface, and what are we going to have to say that might convince lawmakers to not do anything yet this year? And some of that will be driven by what budgets come in. If budgets come in with another double-digit increase, the pressure on the legislature is going to be unbearable. So it's awkward, but it is.
Yeah.
Just that we should keep that in mind.
Zoe and then Jennifer.
I had two thoughts. One is just around how we organize the table to communicate the intent of how we will work together. My thought is sometimes if we actually make a change to the visual, it could help cement understanding of how we're doing this work. So instead of showing 4 different subcommittees, it could be helpful to have kind of one larger box that shows the scope of responsibility for the entire commission, then including the 2 boxes that are the subcommittees to make explicit that those are kind of separate and reporting back to the larger commission. So that might just be helpful if we reorganize that content and information to make that explicit, with a note that at any time in the conversation of the commission, they may make the determination that a subcommittee would be valuable, at which point they could form that for additional subject matter experts to review and provide feedback to the larger commission. So that's just kind of an organizing consideration. And then around the timeline, I do think there is a need for us to put some clarity around when we expect to do certain work so that we really can be delivering on that. So for example, just as we think about setting the direction, I think we should put a stake in the ground around of when the commission fully, makes a motion to clarify the problem, the intent, and how our guiding principles, right? I think it's creating a sense of urgency around that is really important. I think for promoting public engagement, it's going to be really critical to signal to the public when that will happen in a robust way. And I think it will force us to really think about what we will bring forward to those public engagement sessions. I also think as we consider table setting, that's a lot of what the agency's Listen and Learn tour is designed to do, is really a lot of that table setting work. Being explicit about that can be helpful, right, to continue to move us forward and promoting this phased approach to engagement, which recognizes first the need to do table setting and knowledge building, allowing us time to consider different options that then at a later date would be brought forward to the community for really specific impact, but input. But I do think we need to push ourselves to get concrete around what types of strategies we would want input on from the community in time for us to make short-term recommendations.
Yeah, just a quick comment to that one before Jennifer. It just reminds me, Zoe, that the Communication and Engagement Subcommittee also met and that's one of our discussion and agenda items, is actually ideas and thoughts that they have about exactly that piece. The phases and actually, which the commission talked about, the idea that it's recursive and it has to continue. It's like a cycle of engagement. And frankly, they also talk there, that committee is recommending to the commission that is a place where we need consultation with experts in engagement. So I think it makes sense to bring it up exactly as you're talking about, Zoe, so that, and then dovetail those 2 conversations, basically, because I think that the thoughts that committee have is some of the how of what you just talked about. I also liked the reframing of the image or the how we're presenting it in general. And it reminded me of a side comment that could be something that a consultant who's working on engagement does, or is a little bit of marketing. Like once we have put the stake in the ground and said, these are our definitions, this is our work plan, this is our framework, having that in even this is only organized enough for the commission to understand. It's not really publicly accessible. And that's not just marketing, it's making it understandable to the community. It's part of that knowledge building piece. So I didn't want to lose that, because I think once we have affirmed these things, we should try to figure out in pretty quick order. And maybe that is, agency has resources to make things look a lot more accessible and understandable, or it's part of consultant work. We can talk about that. Jennifer.
So I just had another thought, and I'm trying to think of how to say this, but when we are communicating this work plan to the General Assembly, is it worth, requesting or pointing out that as the commission is doing this work, it would be really, helpful maybe to not have the General Assembly doing work that could potentially conflict with the work that has been delegated to the commission? And I don't, I
Good luck.
don't want to disrespect anybody, but it does occur to me, I know that everyone feels like there's a problem here that needs to be solved. And I mean, one of the benefits of this commission that has been assembled is that there are so many different, groups that are being represented. And then there's this, expectation and, commitment to expanding that, to, get more voices, because we're only 13 people, and we want to make sure that we are collecting voices from those who are not on the commission. And so I think we have a very thoughtful process that is being put into place to ensure that this is a well thought out, meaningful, robust conversation that we have been asked to have. So I wouldn't want the work of the General Assembly in the next legislative session to potentially conflict with that work. And I mean, I don't, Senator Cummings, I don't know how plausible that suggestion is.
I would suggest we have an ongoing conversation with leadership, because that's the one group that can say, I can say my committee's not going to take it up, but I can't say that the education committee's not going to take it up and do it. And there'll be a fair number of newbies that have made promises on the campaign trail, and they're going to feel obligated to do something. So controlling what the legislature can do in a democracy is challenging, if at all possible. But I would talk to leadership as an ongoing conversation as to, this is where we are, this is where we're going. What can we do this year that won't throw a wrench in where we think we're going next year? But it's going to be a challenge, and there are no guarantees.
Nicole.
Yeah, I agree. And I think probably there are two things that we could do to set ourselves up for success. One is there are a lot of folks that have declared the commission to be a failure before we even met, right? And so demonstrating progress, I think it's another reason why not putting off these conversations until 2025 is important, right? So we need to dig in, and I feel like we've gotten off to a very strong start. Our meetings have felt productive, and like we've laid some good groundwork to actually do some work. But I think that's step number one, is we demonstrate through our actions that we are an effective body that is working through difficult and complex issues that are difficult to work through in a legislative context. Number two, I think, and I believe the associations have started this conversation, and I expect that they will continue this conversation with the membership around the FY26 budgeting process and send some clear messages, set some clear expectations that we do not see another year of double-digit increases, right? And so I think those two things, budgeting work underway locally that is responding to the feedback from local communities, which I expect school boards will do, but starts to grapple with some of these difficult cost centers, but also the commission having some, concrete recommendations will be really key. We can't predict what other people will do, but I think those will serve this process well.
Yeah. Zoe.
I think it'll be important for the commission to clarify what recommendations have been vetted to the extent that they could be actionable at this current time, and what are practices that are very promising but may require further study or analysis with a time bound, a very specific time bound for implementation. And I think to get there, we need to be really concrete pretty quickly around what are some of the things that we want to be exploring. And that, came up through our subcommittee on education finance, is being explicit about the menu of options. Some of those ideas might have been entertained before, some of those ideas might be new, but starting to get very concrete in defining those options, evaluating their feasibility within Vermont, and recognizing where we may still have some questions or considerations before moving forward. I think that's going to be really critical for us to stay focused in accelerating that work, because that's what's going to be concrete. And many of those ideas have been presented before, so they'll likely be presented again in this legislative session. And I think it's important for us to be really thorough and thoughtful around how those strategies could be deployed, and which strategies can be deployed in isolation versus those that really need to have coordination with a broader set of changes. And getting concrete on that will be important, and I think setting the stage in the public around these are things to consider, right? There are limitations to what the options are, and acknowledging that and being very explicit will be important, but also challenging, because once those ideas are put forward, it creates a lot of feelings and it creates a lot of questions. And I think the way we engage in that conversation is important, and having an opening around listening to what may be relevant, what may not be. And again, being very data-driven and objective in that work. And as we go forward, to continue to challenge assumptions, to continue to look at this in a new way, and to the extent possible, really model what the impact would be on our education system. And I think going back to our guiding principles is going to be important, because if we are really consistent about staying focused on equity and quality and sustainability, I think we'll be true to what we're trying to achieve.
I think that's really important in that conversation about the menu of possibilities. I left the finance committee shortly after that, but that to me is really critical. And what I'm wondering about is the extent to which we can reflect that in this framework work plan, because that would be a way, it's not quite a timeline, but it is a recognition that that is part of what the finance subcommittee will produce, because it's concrete. And I think that's part of why in some ways that's related to the discounting of the work of the commission before it gets started, is because it's very ethereal right now, and it's appropriate to be that way, but there are also things that we know that we can put out there. So I'm not suggesting we put that menu in the work plan, but we reflect that that menu is part of what the finance committee will produce. My brain is going to logistics, because I really would love this group's eyes on the revised framework. I feel a little bit more confident reflecting the definitions we talked about, and I think that could go in the packet. I wonder what you all think about giving ourselves time to, instead of trying to put the revised framework document in the packet tomorrow in the materials, that we walk people through it on Monday. There's always a challenge. People always prefer to read things in advance. And so it's balancing between them getting it in advance versus us having more time to play around with it. Because I can certainly take a stab at reflecting it. And maybe that is the answer as I'm talking, is just put it out there as a draft that you all will react to as the same. I don't know. What do folks think? Zoe.
My thought is at least documenting some of these general considerations, even if it's a very drafty, if you will, even kind of bullet points around like, here are the broad considerations that we have that we want to build into the final. Do these resonate with you as a committee? And then we can really get concrete. But I think having something general for them to react to would be important to see if we're on the right track. Because I think we're there. I think we've articulated kind of a core set of principles and direction here. It just may need some time refining.
Great. Jennifer.
Zoe, didn't I hear you say that you were sort of visualizing a reorganization of this framework? Because I'm wondering if you have the time, if you could put that out there to let commission members respond to that as well.
I will do my best.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll be, since I'm often the one feeling like I'm pressuring Zoe, she has a lot on her plate, and I am trying to actually, if it really is just summarizing, I don't mind being the one to summarize, because I'm not wed to the fact that I might not get it right the first time. So we'll have something in the packet to react to. I think it will be a summary, a more narrative summary of the definitions we talked about, and it will be an initial reframing of this framework with some bullet points for it. If the image is not perfect yet, we will explain what we intend to do with the image, and that will buy us some time. And that way the goal is still that it goes out to the commission by tomorrow, because I think that's respectful, so that they can come. Our conversation will be more useful if we can do that. So I think we can get there. Nicole.
So I just want to make sure we're not talking about substantive changes to what's here. It's really just sort of reordering it or reframing it slightly so that, okay. So I totally trust you, Megan, to reflect the conversation. And if visually it ends up looking different because Zoe has some more time on her hands at a subsequent date, great. I mean, I think there are no work plan police out there, right? And so like we've put together a solid set of principles and general plan for how we're going to do our work that will naturally evolve over time. And I think we need to, that might be helpful for the, there was a little bit of conversation around, you know, for the public purposes of the public, do we need to be more granular and detailed about what exactly we're going to do? It might be helpful to sort of address that in some way. That, and I think we sort of did, but just to say out front, you know, this is in no way precluding us from sharing out. And that's why we have this community engagement committee too, right? The public engagement committee is to really get more clarity. These are the topics for discussion. This is the you know, more concrete, granular steps that we're taking. But I think if we spend too much time agonizing over a work plan, we don't get to the work.
Right.
I totally agree. And I also think that we'll be able to explain to the public that part of what the Communication and Engagement Committee needs to do is actually the work to make all of this accessible. So our working concepts, it's more important that we land on them. We then have a to-do, and I don't think it's I really like the idea of reorganizing so it's clear what is a subgroup and what's not. Because actually the steering group is a subgroup, and so we could move ourselves into that grid. But there will be work done to make it more understandable and accessible, and maybe become part of this toolkit or roadshow that will then exist so that we can be consistent. And if we just say that out loud, then it will satisfy, folks who say that this isn't the perfect way to represent it, because it's probably not. Okay. I think that I should say, anything else related to the work plan or definitions that we should talk about before moving on? Okay. Just kind of an acknowledgement that there will also be probably a more in-depth time on the agenda than just a committee report for the Communication and Engagement Committee to present something back, because they also have a couple of things. They have their recommendations that they'd like the commission to think about, and also potentially some requests for proposal language, because their recommendation is to secure consultation support in that area. I had one more question I wanted to pose to the steering group. It has to do with public comment that gets received by the public comment email address on the website. And there is actually the Communication and Engagement Committee also talked about how will we represent and house public comment. But my sense is that we would continue to do what we did for this last August meeting, full commission meeting, which is public comment received in writing in between the meetings would be sent to the commission alongside agenda materials, just so you all are able to read it. And the only reason that's top of mind is we just received a letter from a school district that I think is probably a letter that went to multiple entities, but it's just related to the budget situation and increases in current realities. So I guess the question is, should the commission receive each one of those? Because these are official public comment. That I see that differently than people who correspond with me as the chair. Those are usually personalized questions that get a response back. But an actual public comment, should it be sent to the full commission in agenda materials?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense because it allows it to be something that the full commission can read. And then and again, the engagement committee talked about, does it sit on the website so that the public can also read public comment? Because that's the point. Nicole.
Yeah, that's my point. I think it is important that the public also, and so if it's part of our materials, then it will be part of the public record.
Great. Perfect. Okay. All right. Well, if there's nothing else specific to agenda planning, is there anything else specific to agenda planning? Okay. So then I was going to move us on to our cadence of meetings as a steering group. We, as a commission, loosely, I think, came to a loose agreement that we would have a standing, it would not preclude any committee from scheduling a meeting at a different time, but that we would have a standing idea that the third Monday of every month could be used for committee meetings. And since steering group plays an agenda planning role, that feels like a good idea, because then it actually gives more time than we have right now to be able to turn around agenda materials. So that would mean this group agreeing to meet the third Monday of every month, which would be the 16th, I think. Is it the 16th? Yeah, the 16th is the next one. And the Communication and Engagement Committee grabbed the 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock timeframe. So I was going to propose that we meet from 9 until 10. That's a bit of a random suggestion. So if someone wants to offer a different time, It would be virtual. Any objections to 9 to 10 as on the third Monday of every month? Okay. That will allow Suzanne and Maureen to be able to put a repeating invite out to all of you and kind of post those looking forward, which will be easy. At minimum, the agenda will be public comment, agenda planning, public comment. So we can certainly make adjustments as we move forward, but okay.
Megan, my one question is really, I'm thinking about you, because if the communications committee is meeting from 8 to 9, I know that meetings often run over, or maybe you need to take a 5-minute break. So I'm just, yeah, this is really more a question for you, whether that feels feasible, or if you want to like bump out the start time a little bit just to give yourself some room to breathe.
Well, it's funny you say that, and I just looked at my own notes, and I think I actually meant to propose 9:15 to 10:15. Is anybody opposed to 9:15 to 10:15? Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, if worst comes to worst, I could, I'm not, yeah, but no, I appreciate that. Okay, so 9:15 to 10:15 on the third Monday of the month, unless and until we make a change. Okay. All right. With that, we are a few minutes early, but are there members of the public who would like to make comments? And you can raise your hand or unmute and show your camera, because I can see that as well. That would be a way for us to see. Karen Horn, I don't know if you intended to raise your hand for public comment, but I noticed your camera just went on. Do you want to address the committee?
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Oh, thank you. I didn't actually realize that my camera had gone on. It's been a while since I've done this kind of stuff. Sorry. I just want to express a serious concern that there are not taxpayers represented, it seems, on this group. So those are the people that are going to be, that are paying for the education system, and we're very concerned. I don't have, I'll just say, because I've worked for the League of Cities and Towns for years, I'm not working for them. I'm not working for anybody right now. I'm just me. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And apologies if I put you on the spot and you didn't intend to.
No worries.
Any other comments? Okay. With that, I think that we are ready. Just a reminder for public, for the public, you certainly can also submit public comments in writing. There's an email address on the commission's website. And we are early, which is not a bad thing. So I have a motion to adjourn. So moved, Nicole. All right.
Second.
Thank you, Anne. All those in favor?
Hi.
Okay, we are adjourned at 9:41. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.